Hello, welcome to another episode of Navigating Cancer Together. It is the show that has something for everyone facing cancer. Why? Because everyone is different with different needs, beliefs, and perspectives. Thank you for joining us for this episode. I encourage you to open your minds and your hearts. Navigating Cancer Together is everywhere. Make sure to subscribe and follow the show to stay updated on our latest episodes. You can find Navigating Cancer Together on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or your preferred podcast app or platform. Before we get into the show, here's a question that I would love for you to think about. What was the most surprising or impactful takeaway you gained from our guest's story today? And how might it influence your own perspectives or actions? You can respond to this question by commenting right under the show here, or you can also comment on our fan list page, which is fanlist.com/NCT podcast. I will have that link in the show notes as well. Also, if you prefer, you can send an email to nctpodcastfan@gmail.com. And again, that question is, what was the most surprising or impactful takeaway you gained from our guest story today? And how might it influence your own perspective or actions? And again, you can respond to this question on our fan list page at fanlist.com/NCT podcast. Also, you can respond via email at nctpodcastfan@gmail.com. And another option is to leave a comment on Spotify under this episode as well. Okay, let's get to it. Today, our very special guest is the amazing Wenora Johnson. Wenora is a patient, survivor, thriver, caregiver, and advocate. She is a 3-time cancer survivor, having battled colorectal, endometrial, and basal cell carcinoma. She is a dedicated volunteer research and patient advocate, as well as a proud Navy veteran. She serves on numerous panels and review boards, offering invaluable feedback from the perspective of a patient and research advocate. In addition to her advocacy work, Wenora is an administrative professional in the greater Chicagoland area. She enjoys reading and traveling with her family. You are going to be so inspired by Wenora and her story. Without further ado, Wenora, thank you so much for joining us today and welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here and excited to share my journey and story with you.
Wonderful, Wenora. I'm so happy to have you with us today. The audience is going to get a lot of great information about a very inspiring person as such as yourself and all the wonderful work that you're doing in advocacy. But before we dive into the conversation, I'd love for the valued listeners to get to know you a little bit better. Wenora, what is something that you find unique about yourself that might surprise the listeners out there?
One thing is that I am an 8-year Navy veteran. I served on the reserve side. And from that, I guess that's where I got my strength to continue to do things that I've always wanted to do. For example, ride a motorcycle and be excited about doing something that was just out of the norm for, typically for women.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. What is something, Renora, that brings you genuine happiness and joy?
I think what brings me genuine happiness and joy in this journey at this point in my life is really being a patient advocate, sharing knowledge and education and bringing awareness around the importance of advocacy for patients so that they can live a long and healthier life.
Wonderful. You mentioned that you are a proud Navy veteran, and I'm really interested to know how your military background influenced your approach to navigating cancer and becoming a dedicated advocate.
I think for me, my military background had a profound impact on how I faced cancer. It comes with the discipline, structure, resilience, and mental toughness that was instilled in me during my service the entire 8 years. It became essential tools for me in my survival. And in the military, you're trained to be calm under pressure and to take steps at a time and adapt to the unknown, all of which translated directly into how I approached my current cancer journey, treatment, and recovery.
That's very interesting. I think a lot of times we don't realize how our other experiences, whether in our careers or other experiences throughout life, help us to get through the tough times. And so being able to use those prior skill sets and leverage those to help us through whatever it is that we're currently facing is something that I think is often overlooked. So thanks for really highlighting how that experience helped you.
Yeah. And for me, if I may add additionally, it just made me understand that I treated cancer like it was a mission, and I was on a mission for survival. And surviving the outcome of that has proved beneficial, not just for me, but for my family as well. It's taught us all that, your story can be more than just an illness you're afflicted with.
Absolutely. When Nora, we first connected in February of 2024, and I actually heard you speak on a panel about how Lynch syndrome helped to save your life. First of all, what is Lynch syndrome? And please share with us what that all entailed, how it saved your life.
In simple terms, Lynch syndrome is an inherited condition that makes a person more likely to get certain types of cancer throughout their lifetime, especially cancers like colon and endometrial, often at a younger age than usual. There's a couple things associated with that. It's genetic. It has a strong connection to other cancers like ovarian, stomach, small intestine, and it may include things like skin cancer as well. And it was discovered because my oncologist went the extra mile in putting my family history together. She suspected that I was Lynch syndrome, but encouraged me to take a genetic test, which confirmed her suspicions. So again, because of my communication with my oncologist and explaining to her that my family, various individuals have had cancer, she put it together. And I contribute that, and her persistence to ask me to take a genetic test really helped save my life.
So you were diagnosed with Lynch syndrome because you took a genetic test. Is that what you're saying? That's how you got to that diagnosis?
That's how I got to it. And the funny part about it is that after I had gotten through my treatment for colorectal cancer, and I was almost 4.5 years out, almost at my 5 year marker of what they say is your survival plan. If you can make it past those 5 years, you're good. And she just asked me, and kept asking me to take that genetic test. And at first I was a little resistant because I thought, if I've survived this far, this long with no issues, there appears to be no reoccurrence, why should I do a genetic test? And she just went on to further explain to me what she suspected again, and that each visit she would just encourage me to do it. And then finally, I just said, you know what? Let me do it, because this is what's the problem with us, as we're hard-headed individuals. We don't listen. And I didn't want to be that person giving my oncologist a hard time. And so I finally relented. And when I did and read that 12-page report that stated that I had a 60% chance of getting endometrial cancer, I was like, wow, it was definitely a light bulb moment. And yet I took that moment to do something about it. I decided that at that time, through consulting with my other physicians, that I would just have a total hysterectomy. And that total hysterectomy revealed upon the biopsy that I had the early stages of endometrial cancer. And I think that's probably what really woke me up the fastest and really contributed me to doing my patient advocacy work, because I was sitting in the unknown, already headed into a secondary cancer. And this genetic test, like I said, was another wake-up call and can save my life as well.
Thank you for sharing that, Wenora. I really want the audience to get a clear picture of your three cancer diagnoses. Please just walk us through that. and let us know, are they interconnected in some way? Are they separate? Please just help us get a clearer picture, because I think it's so important for people to be able to think about and be aware of how things can be interconnected or not, and what to look for. For sure, genetic testing is very important, but please just kind of walk us through your first diagnoses, your second, and your third, and just explain if they are or are not interconnected. I think that's really important.
Thank you. And I guess it begins just when I go back to 2011. And I was definitely into my yearly checkups with my primary care provider. They asked me to do something a little bit different this time. They asked me to take a fit test, which is a stool type of test. And again, I put it off and waited, put it on the back of the toilet. And if it wasn't for the nurse assistant who called and said, could I just please turn it in? It led to what would be a colonoscopy and surgery, and then just waking up from surgery with a late stage diagnosis of colorectal cancer. It was stage 3B. And for me, the kicker part is that it had been there for 15 years, according to my oncologist. So I was 45 at the time. If you count back 15 years, that meant at the age of 30, I had started developing cancerous polyps that were not being under surveillance. And so after a successful treatment of colorectal cancer, it involved a resection of my colon and, of course, chemotherapy. It leads me to 2016, where I was, again, we talked a little bit earlier about my oncologist asking me to do that genetic test, and that genetic test revealing that I was Lynch syndrome positive. I had an MSH2 mutation, which meant that any future cancers, as well as I would continue to get cancers in the futures, would probably be very aggressive. And when it mentioned 60% chance of having endometrial cancer, I thought, this is my opportunity to do something about it, and got a complete hysterectomy, only to find that there were the beginning stages again of endometrial cancer. Now, because again, it was the beginning stages, the only thing that was needed for treatment was the total hysterectomy, and I felt like I had dodged a bullet in a sense. But that following year in 2017, I had what appeared to be a really small pimple on my backside. It was really tiny, but it was tiny enough to bother me every time I would put my shirt on and up, and I would just feel it or brush by it. And by then, I've looked up what Lynch syndrome could be, and thinking that could this possibly be also triggered by my Lynch syndrome status? And I mentioned that to the dermatologist that I decided to visit. She didn't seem too concerned at first. She went on to even go and say that she thought maybe it was just a sac of oil cells. She'll remove them and we'll go forward from there, only to have that small surgery done in her office. And she removed about 2 inches of basal cell carcinoma out of my backside. And so it did a couple of things for me that day when I had to come in to get the biopsy read. And she looked at me and said that this was indeed cancerous, or part of the cancer family. I just thought that if I don't know these things, other people clearly don't know what's in their future as well. And it kicked off again my, how can I say, drive for patient advocacy and wanting to help others so that they wouldn't have to go through these very things that I would continue to go through. And even to this day, still at times, due to regular surveillance, don't get a full-blown case of cancer, but I am still under regular surveillance.
That is a lot. Thank you so much for sharing that. Renora, let's go back to the colorectal cancer. You mentioned a FIT test. I've taken those before. Actually, I do them every year. My question for you is, were you not recommended a colonoscopy at that time because of your age? What was going on there? Because I know the guidelines have changed, particularly for Black and
Yeah.
African American people, raising that age to a younger age just because of the higher incidences. So, can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And it was actually in 2011 when I was diagnosed with my colorectal cancer. I was 45 at that time. And you are correct. At that time period, 50 was the standard. And every year I presented a healthy person to my primary care physician. There was no real need for him to suspect that I might need a colonoscopy. And I guess to this day, really didn't really ask him what made him ask me to do a fit test at the age of 45. It was just something maybe his office was doing for all patients at that time. And I'm just so glad he did, because that fit test picked up something that I didn't even realize was there. And that was small traces of blood that I couldn't see, that wasn't visible to my eye, but was visible in the biopsy of that stool sample. And that, of course, led to the colonoscopy. And then the colonoscopy itself, when she said that I might have to do surgery because I can't get the colonoscopy scope to go through. And that was a little bit alarming. And then finally, like you said, waking up and being told that, yeah, you had stage 3B cancer and that we have to resection a part of your colon. We have to cut out 8 inches of your colon and resect it back together and then put you on chemo.
That's a blessing. Actually, that's a huge blessing because it uncovered so many different things and it gave you different things to look out for. So, like you said, it really started your education and awareness about cancer. So, kudos to that doctor. That's amazing. You are a huge champion, of course, of genetic testing and clinical trials. And we haven't really talked a whole lot about clinical trials. One thing I want to ask you, Renora, is where can people learn more about those things? Because we don't really hear a lot about genetic testing. Clinical trials is starting to get more traction, but particularly in the Black and African American communities, those things are not really things that are recommended or things that we talk about. So, where can people get more education?
These again are great questions because it leads to where can I get information about a genetic testing? Or let's say no one's talked to me about genetic testing. And this is why there's such the big talk about self-advocacy. Self-advocacy means speaking up and asking questions. And so this will require a little work on behalf of patients to ask their physicians or their doctors that, is there a genetic test that I can take? Or can you direct me to a clinical trial counselor? Because I recognize that 5 family members of mine have maybe passed away from cancer. And so this is where we need to be to paying more and more attention. In fact, I just wish that people understood that hereditary cancers are inherited risks that are often detected early through genetic testing, and that knowing your family history is important, but sometimes it's not always enough. You can carry a genetic mutation like a BRCA or Lynch syndrome without having any symptoms or even a strong family history. But the question here is if you suspect that there could be something in your family, that now is that moment and time to speak up to your physician and say, I think I may have something that is hereditary in my family. What is my next step? What can I do? And then there are other organizations out there. If a person is curious about genetic testing, that maybe can answer their questions for them. And even at this day and age, a system with getting genetic testing paid for if it's not paid for through insurance.
Thank you for sharing that, Renora. And so, a genetic counselor would be a good start for people. Okay.
Yes. I definitely recommend a genetic testing counselor who will go over the family history, but not only just do that, share with you good ways about surveillance, about what's the best option for you. For instance, preventive surgeries. If it wasn't for that genetic test revealing what it did, it made me think about the surgeries that I would need in the future to prevent additional cancers that I would have in my lifetime, like a hysterectomy. So that's why genetic counselors are important, because they can help you make that decision. What if you're young enough and you realize that you have a family history of cancer and you want to preserve your fertility? This is where genetic counselors can really help you understand ways to do that. If it's necessary, do you want to? And that's again why it's important to have a genetic counselor brought into your plan of treatment.
Renora, I just want to say that I'm glad you're doing so well despite all of the things that you've been through. And you're a blessing to many people, especially in terms of advocacy and just inspiration. Having gone through three cancers, and you're sitting here today, able to share your story, share your wisdom. And it's an honor to talk with you. It's just such an honor. And I really wish that we would have more Black men and women who are willing to come to the forefront and share their stories, because sometimes who you get that information from makes a difference. Although we all have different journeys with cancer and just with life in general, there are certain things that we struggle with as a culture, as a race. And so I just want to thank you for taking those tough times in those very vulnerable times and sharing the information that you have to share, sharing your story, but then also being an example and a testimony of what's possible after cancer. It doesn't mean that you're always gonna die. Cancer itself is tough, but colorectal cancer is very tough. All of those things. And so you coming here today and sharing your story and walking us through how you got from point A to where you are now is so important. And I just want to thank you so much for that, because you don't have to talk with me. You don't have to talk with anybody. And so thank you so much. And I just wanted to get that out before we went any further.
Thank you for that. And that is just it's a big humble thank you, because what I've realized along in this journey is that sometimes you can scream from the rooftops about how important all of this is, and yet telling your family members or trying to share with them how important this is can be the most frustrating. I have two adult children who I love deeply, and they know my journey, and I've shared this with them. And I want them to be secure in their future, understanding that number one, they may have cancers in their future as well. They have a 50% chance of being Lynch syndrome positive with this MSH2 mutation that I carry. And my hope is that one day that they will themselves get tested and take the necessary steps like colonoscopies and genetic counseling to help them through their journey. And what I've realized is, as much as I'm a patient advocate, I may not be the person who brings the message for them to do something about it. And so it's taken me a couple of years to wrestle with that. And finally, I came to the conclusion that number one, they are adults. This is their decisions. And while I may not necessarily be the message bearer for them, I will be that person there for them when they need help in their next decisions about maybe doing that colonoscopy or following up with a genetic counselor or anything in between. So still there as their mom, regardless of what I wish that they would do. I think that's the most important thing.
And that's an excellent point to raise, is that although we're in these roles of advocacy, you're right. Sometimes it could be our own family who's the hardest to reach. But that doesn't mean that, like you said, they can't get that from somewhere else. But knowing that they can come to you is a huge blessing as well, just leaving that door open. Now, having faced cancer, we both know why self advocacy is so important. And if anyone has not picked up on that yet, I don't know what's going to help you, but please share a story, Renora, highlighting when you have advocated for yourself and how it shaped your cancer journey.
Ooh, wow. I'm I'm going to go back to when it comes to advocating for myself, and it was probably centered more or less around my third cancer, which was the skin cancer, and self-advocacy. What it meant at that moment in time leading up to that was that I started to do a little bit more research and learning more about what Lynch syndrome is and recognizing symptoms that maybe I hadn't thought about before. And so when that third diagnosis of much prepared, though I didn't like the answer, or so that, yeah, it was cancer again. And I had to dispel a myth even that was in my head that how could I get skin cancer? I cover up. I don't go out in the sun. And the truth of the matter is that we as people of color, we can get all kinds of cancers, including skin cancers, that you just can't take things for granted. And so that story for me, that third part of speaking up meant talking to that dermatologist at that time and telling her that I think this may be cancerous. Even though she said she didn't think so, I knew and felt that it was related. And so afterwards, while she did confirm that it was, I decided that I would seek another dermatologist. And I did explain to the office because I didn't want them to think that I didn't care about the treatment that she gave me. But I did explain to them that because I am Lynch syndrome positive, I just needed someone who paid a little bit more attention to what my needs would be for in the future and not brush them off as if that was not the case. And it took a lot. I had to speak up and be brave about it. But I also understood that it was my one chance that if I didn't speak up for myself, that no one else would be able to do this for me on my behalf. I have additional cancers throughout my life prepared ahead of me. And if I don't speak up now, then one of those cancers won't allow me to, and I won't be able to talk and share my story. I won't be alive to tell it. So being a self-advocate is very important to let those individuals who are caring for it, that you're doing this because it's an important part of your life for survivorship.
I'm curious to know, Renora, how did the doctor or dermatologist respond when you basically said, I need more?
Interesting because I believe that most of these doctors have so many patients that they can't get caught up in every patient's story or what's going on with their lives. I remember that day also with her removing the skin cancer from me and then just standing there waiting for my ride to come. The number of patients that were just coming and going after one procedure after the next. Who was I to really question whether or not she truly cared or not? I think some of that, again, as we maybe talked about a little bit, is going to fall on us as patients that we are going to have to step up on our own behalves. If something isn't right, then speak up and say, I often think about one of the biggest things that we do, and I had to stop and force myself from doing, even after my cancer, is that when we go to the doctor and we sit in and we come in for our, whether it's a repeat visit, first time visit, or whatever visit, you sit there and the physician turns around and he says, so how are you today? And the first thing we do is say, oh, I'm okay. And the reality is you're not okay. That's why you're there, because you found something wrong or something just isn't right. Learning to be honest and communicate honestly with that physician is going to be part of your self-advocacy. Speaking up on your own behalf, because when you tell them that you're okay, they're making notation of that in their records that the patient said they were okay. And I'm not okay. I'm suffering from headaches, or I don't feel good. I'm always nauseous. And if you never mention any of that because you think that you're being a difficult patient, then you're doing yourself an injustice.
That is so true. And I really like how you just said, okay, I need more. And you sought a second opinion. You have the right to do that as well. You don't have to go back and forth. If you feel like you're not getting the level of attention and care that you need, you have the right to seek a second opinion. So great job on that as well. Let's talk more about the different panels and review boards that you serve on. And you offer invaluable feedback from the perspective of a patient and a research advocate. Can you please share an example of how your unique patient perspective directly influences research or policy decisions?
I immediately think about my colorectal cancer journey and how it led to me working with an organization who, at that time, when the age was still 50 for individuals to get colonoscopies, work with them on the policy of getting that changed. And going to Capitol Hill and talking with congressional members and senators and sharing with them my story, how, hey, I had no symptoms. I thought I was a healthy individual. And yet I wasn't. I was a walking cancer bomb, as you could say. And how we can help others or from keeping them having to go through this was lowering that age from 50 to 45. And I have to say, by the time 2021 came along, that initiative was taken up and it was passed. And the reason it's important that it starts on the legislative side of that is that it then affects your ability to be covered by your insurance. And so instead of 50 being the standard age, 45 it was lower to, and now insurance company had to adhere to individuals who, if your physician suspected or maybe think that you need a colonoscopy at the age of 45, you can get one. And truth be told, I really think it should even be lower than that. I think, in all honesty, it probably should start and begin at age 35. The incidences of early onset colorectal cancer is extremely high. And I'm not sure if it's contributed to the foods that we eat or if it's environmental or it's hereditary. But whatever they are, there are younger and younger young adults or even children who are getting colorectal cancer, something that is actually like number two or number three deadliest cancers because you really have no symptoms until it's a late stage. When if you can do something to prevent it beforehand, you wouldn't even have to suffer from it. Something as simple as removing polyps before they turn cancerous. So that is an important initiative that I've been using my voice for years and so glad to see it come to fruition with that change to 45. But in essence, just as I said, it should be lower than that.
I really agree with that. It should be lower because, like you said, it's impacting so many people at younger ages. And I just want people to get this out of their minds too, that you have to be a particular age to get any form of cancer. That is not true. It can impact anyone. Babies can get cancer. And so let's get that out of our heads that if you're this certain age, if you're 45 and up or whatever, it does not matter. Cancer doesn't care how old you are. Cancer does not care where you live, how much money you make, what color you are. It does not matter. And so when you feel like something is not right within your body, seek answers. And don't stop until you get the answers that you feel comfortable with. And that is the biggest thing I think is so important about self-advocacy is knowing your body, knowing when something doesn't feel right, and not being afraid to go and seek and get answers because you don't want to look back and it's 3 years later and now you have stage 4 cancer that maybe you could have caught at stage 1. There's so many different things. So just please be in tune with your body and don't be afraid to speak up no matter how old or young you are. It doesn't matter. And thank you for sharing that.
So true. Thank you for bringing that up because there's too many of us that are dying. Too many of us not, maybe some are not able to speak up or not able to understand that the importance of this. But this is why you and I, we're out here, we're educating and we're advocating, we're sharing our stories because this should resonate with someone that I've been experiencing things. If this is your opportunity to speak up on your own behalf or go make that visit to the doctor or follow up with your care, now is that opportunity.
So true. Thank you. We are going to shift directions and go in the caregiver direction. What have you learned serving as a caregiver for your brother who has faced stage 4 colorectal cancer and has also faced mental health challenges? What are some things that you learned in that role?
If I could break that up a little bit just into two pieces. And the first part is that I come from a family who has a history of mental health challenges, which itself carries its own stigma and misunderstandings. And if you throw cancer on top of it, it can bring an additional stress to family members who only really want the best for their loved ones. And when I look at the mental health piece of it, I know for my brother, there were times when the medications itself were complications, but meds that don't work well with mental health meds, and just getting additional treatment related to cancer because he lived in a nursing home facility or he was on Medicare and Medicaid. Those are things that can be challenging in itself. And if there's no family member around or they think that no one cares, these individuals are lost to the system. And so, as the big sister, I felt it was very important for me to speak up on his behalf because he didn't have anyone. The most challenging part of that, it was during COVID as well. And so, a lot of it meant that I was almost like a virtual caregiver, making daily phone calls to him and to his nurses and making sure that because he couldn't tolerate maybe the regular chemotherapy, that you try something like the oral chemotherapy and on how to get those kind of meds. And so I was grateful for those opportunities to be able to help them in that caregiver role that way. But in all honesty, I've been a caregiver probably pretty much all my life. I remember when being a young child, probably as young as 7 or 8, and I cared for my father who had epilepsy. He had grand mal seizures that would eventually take his life. I had a mother who passed away from a brain tumor, glioblastoma. I've taken care of elderly family members who were ill. I had a husband who passed away from pancreatic cancer. And then, of course, 2 years ago, the younger brother that I just was talking about, he himself who passed away from metastatic colorectal cancer. And sometimes you think when you go through all of your stuff, why am I still here? And these individuals are not. I don't think it's necessarily up to us to question it, but to do something about it. And so for me, it's been important that I give back, that I can just be as supportive as I can to others. And this is what I want cancer survivors and caregivers to know, that as a cancer survivor and caregiver, you hold a rare and powerful perspective, one that blends lived strength with deep compassion. The encouragement you can offer carries real weight because it comes from experience and not theory. And part of my healing process was to help others and be that caregiver. Because when you think about it, as a close family member has cancer, or let's just say have any illness, it's almost like you having it as well.
Nora, throughout your various roles as a cancer patient, survivor, caregiver, advocate, champion for genetic testing and clinical trials, how do you take care of yourself?
That that is the wonder piece. I think for me, what has been helpful for me, believe it or not, for the last 14 years of being a cancer survivor and then continue to be a cancer survivor is a lot of times just sharing my story, being an advocate for others, having a seat at that table to share my perspectives as a person of color, as a Black person who experiences real things when it comes to our care. And even though I say how important genetic testing is, there are still consequences that come with this information that you share. Because now, I have been denied for maybe life insurance or other health insurance. And so that's the catch-22 side of being this advocate, is that you're advocating for the good, and yet on the opposite side of that, until things change, until policies change, there's that flip side of it that we're still fighting for, that you're going to get denied or things of that nature. But it shouldn't scare you from doing and making the right choices about your health. You only have one you, and your family wants that you around as long as they can.
So true. Thank you for sharing. Having survived cancer 3 times and served as a caregiver, what does navigating cancer together mean to you?
It, ooh, that's just a loaded, loaded question. And I guess at the end of the day, it means for me being there for others who can't speak up, don't have the ability to speak up, and yet want to survive as well. I think that is just so important, that living your life in the way that is informed, you informing others and you empowering others, you're going to live that longer life that you want. It, how am I trying to say that cancer, it may change your life, but you want that life to be looked at as you, how can I say it, Leah? I'm lost for words with that one.
Hey,
It's
it's
just,
okay. It's okay. There's no perfect answer.
I guess for me, as I look back through and I continue to go forward, for me, this just journey as just even being a patient advocate is so powerful, is that even after I look in retirement in a couple of years, I want to move into this just full time. I want to give it my all because, like I said, too many of us are dying for unknown reasons and dying because we can't speak up or don't have the ability to, or we're afraid to, or we don't understand how important something as simple as clinical trials could be for us. And so I've decided not just to talk the talk, but I'm going to walk the walk. And so as I tell others out here that, hey, clinical trials are important and they could save your life, especially a person of color's life, then they need to understand, well, are you a person who's also participated in a clinical trial? And I could say yes. In fact, it's so important for me that answer is yes, because I'm involved right now in a clinical trial for a Lynch syndrome vaccine. And to me, the implications are so important. It's so personal, not just to keep me alive year after year, but for my children, again, who have a 50% chance of being Lynch syndrome positive. It means that they will get a chance to live maybe cancer free with a vaccine where they don't have to get cancer in their lifetime. And so if it means that, if I hate to say the word sacrificial lamb, but if it means doing that, I'm willing to do that for my family, not just for them, but for others too.
Yeah, it's about helping future generations and
Yeah,
contributing to the greater good of healthcare and research. So that's
abs
wonderful.
absolutely. I mentioned this in an opportunity. I had to share some information with another organization that we always talk about generational wealth, but we never talk about generational health. And understanding that what our family members prior to us might have passed away from, or our illnesses and how they may affect and shape our future are so important. And so that generational knowledge is important.
So true. As we start to wind down, Wenora, I would love to know what is one word that you would use to describe how you survived cancer and why?
Woo. One word I would use I would just say resilient. Just being able to get through it all, in spite of all the bad news is of you have cancer again and again, being resilient has led me to where I am today, where I'm using my patient advocacy role to help others in a way that will be life-saving, like you said, going forward to the next generation.
Someone listening to this conversation has just been told that they have cancer. And someone else listening to this conversation has just completed treatment and they've been told, congratulations, we will see you in 3 months. What words of encouragement will you give these folks who are where you once were?
That this isn't how your story ends. Each chapter is a new beginning, and you pick up and you go forward. You don't let cancer define who you are. It doesn't get to say the last word. You have the opportunity to say the last word in your story and how you want it to go. Cancer was just a part of it, not the whole story.
I want to make sure that we share this as well. You work with FORCE, Facing Our Risk of Cancer Empowered. Please tell the audience more about FORCE and where they could find this website.
Force, in other words, it's called Facing Our Risk of Cancer Empowered, is an organization that is primarily focused on hereditary cancers. It's a great place if you go to the website. and you type in force or facing our risk of cancer empowered, it gives you a ton of information about hereditary cancers. There's support groups, there's research information, there's information about public policies, a little bit of which we talked about when it came to my own journey in colorectal cancer treatment and getting the age lowered for colonoscopies. There's just a host of information that helps patients when they feel like they have nowhere to turn to. They're great resources. Say, for instance, you just want to type in the word colon cancer. It can also pull up maybe the nearest trial that's taking place. You can ask questions that will give you opportunities on a, what do they call it? A message board to get your questions answered. I myself, when I first began working with Force, I started out as a peer navigator. And a peer navigator is an individual who assists callers who come in with a similar or disease or cancer that you've had. And so basically, the individuals that I talked to were those who suffered from Lynch syndrome as well. And what I found from that was just as therapeutic and healing for me because a lot of times individuals weren't necessarily sometimes looking for answers. They just wanted to share their story. They just wanted to talk about their journey, about where they are, what their next steps were, and that it's okay because you're not the only one going through this. And there's a whole community of individuals that can help you. There's Facebook groups, support groups that Force holds. Again, like I mentioned, the message board groups, there's the peer navigation. And then if you feel bold and strong enough, you can also become a patient advocate with Force as well, where you're involved at sitting at that table, taking it an opportunity to lend your voice, your story to help research and science figure this out.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Wenora. And it's www.facingourrisk.org. I will have that information in the show notes as well. So anyone who's listening, and if you're interested in learning more about Force and the services they provide, or even joining them in advocacy, be sure to check out their website. You touched on something that I really want to bring out a little bit further. I could just talk to you all day. I know we have to wrap up soon, but I'm very curious. My mind just keeps generating all these questions. So, one thing I think is really important before we wrap up is for people who are interested in getting involved in advocacy. Of course, they can join organizations like Force. Is there anything else you want to share about if people are interested in taking that path?
Well, I think what I would share with individuals is that if you're ready to share your story, and the reason that I say that is because I remember recently, I want to say last year, I had an opportunity to talk in front of a group of my colleagues and shared some of my story. And afterwards, I received an email from an individual who said they had recently gone through ovarian cancer and that they were so excited to hear about all the other possibilities out there with genetic testing, clinical trials, and me just sharing my story. And I was like, this is great. Surely you want to share your story as well. And she told me no. She says, I just wanted to survive. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to even look at it anymore. It's in her back rear view mirror, so to say. And what I came to really realize is that not everybody wants to do that. It takes a special person to want to be able to give up enough of themselves to share your story publicly, what you went through, the financial toxicities, the losing your job, whatever it takes, whatever cancer did to you. And sharing that publicly can be difficult for some people. And yet it's part of your whole story of why you're here, because you're helping someone else get through something that they thought was impossible.
You're right. We all have the option to decide if we want to share our stories. It's not a requirement. And so if you're someone who doesn't, that's okay. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. And also, I think we should highlight that sharing our stories comes with people who say a lot of nice things, but sometimes people don't. And so you really have to keep that in mind too. You're
Yeah,
putting yourself out there, you're putting your health history out there. There's so many different things to think about. And I really think there's no right or wrong way. You can do it or you don't
no,
have to.
yeah,
And it's okay.
yeah. So true. And for me, it's through the years, it just became a form of therapy. And to this day continues to be my therapy. And so I enjoy doing this, regardless of the nerves and all of that stuff. And talking to you, Talaya, the nerves are there, but I just feel it's so important that you push past those nerves and you tell people just how important regular surveillance is, educating yourself about cancer, just how about just self-advocacy? You really hit home so much on the importance of self-advocacy.
Thank you so much for sharing, Wenora. You have shared so much information with us today, very helpful information. Thank you for sharing your stories and walking us through your cancer journey. Is there anything else before we end, Wenora, that you would like to share that you haven't had an opportunity to share?
I think what I'd like to say, first of all, is just thank you so much for all of this work that you're doing. I see your blood, sweat, and tears. And you and I, when we first met and talked, you were just trying to figure this out. Like, how can I reach more audiences? How can, I want to help more people. And I love your spirit of enthusiasm and I see it paying off. I see it paying dividends. And just thank you for that because it gives me the added push that I need sometimes when you feel like you want to give up. Is anyone paying attention or does it even matter? And then at the end of the day, it does matter. And so I want to say we appreciate you for taking this platform and giving us an opportunity to share as well.
Thank you so much, Wenora. That means so much coming from you. And I receive it. So thank you. And I just wish you the best in your health and everything that you're doing. Thank you for all of the important work that you're doing, helping to save lives. And I am just excited for everyone to learn more about you. Thank you for joining me today and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Valued listeners, what was the most surprising or impactful takeaway you gained from Wenora's story? And how might it influence your own perspective or actions? If you share, I may read your responses on a future episode. You can leave responses to this question or just anything that you want to share about the show, anything. You can leave that information on our fanlist.com/NCT podcast page. You can also leave a comment on Spotify, or you can send an email to nctpodcastfan@gmail.com. If you found today's conversation helpful or inspiring, please tell someone else about it who may benefit from hearing it. Your share can make a huge difference. This episode was made possible by On the Other Side. Their support helps us to continue these important conversations. On the Other Side is a cancer navigation enterprise offering cancer doula support to individuals and families who are facing cancer. Get emotional support, guidance, advocacy, and so much more when you partner with a cancer doula from On the Other Side. Visit ontheotherside.life to learn more about cancer doula services today. Before we end, I would like to give a shout out to the Navigating Cancer Together community and valued listeners. Thank you so much for joining us. That is it for this Wednesday. And until next time, let's keep navigating cancer together. Take care.